Not many families can say that they have done the same work for even 2 generations. My sister and I are 3rd-generation photographers in our family. It all started in 1898 when my grandfather immigrated to America, bringing with him the first motion pictures to the Tacoma and Seattle area from France. Paul Richard was a well-known businessman, very handsome and charismatic. He met my grandmother, Pearl Aldrich, whose father, Byron Aldrich, was also a pioneer in photography in the Tacoma area. Paul swept Pearl off her feet, and they were married in December of 1899. Paul continued to travel, working for the government, and would periodically take the long sea voyage back to France to photograph the devastated areas from the war. His photographs form part of the government historical records from World War I. He and Pearl communicated often, writing beautifully hand-penned love letters that would also take their voyage across the sea. Mon chéri, comment ça va? Il y a longtemps que je parle. Together they had 8 children. But tragically, Paul died in 1921 while working in France from exposure to mustard gases. He never got a chance to see his youngest child, who was named after him, and Pearl was notified of his death by a telegram. Richard's studio was established in 1921 by Paul's oldest son, 19-year-old Turner Richards. All of the Richards family members were involved in running the business in one way or another, and Mom Pearl would go out selling with one child by the hand and one under her arm. My father, Bob Richards, was the second from the youngest child, and after serving in the 1st Motion Picture Unit of the Air Corps in World War II, he joined the family business, achieving a national reputation as an architectural and industrial photographer. Richards' commercial photo service grew to be the premier commercial and portrait photography studio in the Puget Sound area. They offered their professional services for social events, weddings, industrial, military, and any other type of photography that was desired. Over the years, the Richards family operated 7 studios in the Tacoma area, including a camera store, and with the availability of color photography, they opened a photographic lab named Rich Color. My mother, Claire Repetto, accepted a job as a receptionist at the downtown Richards studio, where my father trained her, and she became an amazing award-winning photographer. Later, when my mother threatened to run off with a sailor unless they were married, my father proposed, and they were married in 1957. Both Bob and Claire were very charismatic people who could capture the best in people. When my sister Tracy and I were born, we soon became Daddy's darlings. We were perfect little models and had hundreds of photographs taken of us. We grew up in the studios, played dress-up with all the props, and were constantly asked to pose for a photo shoot or used to test new lighting or equipment. I remember the smell of the darkroom chemicals and the photo oils, and watched how the artists would transform a black and white image into a hand-colored masterpiece. After the death of my father in 1970, we moved to the Edmonds area, where my mother opened a portrait studio called Richards of Edmonds. When the Tacoma studios were closed in 1980, 828,000 negatives, slides, and photographic prints were donated to the Tacoma Public Library. This is now called the Richards Collection and documents the history of Tacoma for almost a century. As a 3rd-generation photographer, finding my niche in this family of talented photographers was not easy. I was initially drawn to black and white photography, where color is not a distracting element and images are clearly seen through composition, lighting, and contrast. I then experimented with hand-coloring images, as I have a passion for the romance of the past and try to recreate this timeless quality in my photographs. I formed a business called Martine Fabrizio Photography in the Linwood area, where I was quite successful in photographing children and families and preserving the images using archival processes. My images are custom printed on fiber-based papers, then hand-colored using dyes, oils, and pencils. I add color selectively, allowing some of the black and white tones to remain. My sister Tracy continued her branch of the family tree of photography by taking over the family studio in Edmonds for several years. Then, intrigued by our family history, she moved to Europe, where she reconnected with 3 of our French cousins in their 80s, who remember our grandfather Paul Richard, who was their uncle. Tracy enjoys photographing people and bands in the rock and roll industry and travels around Europe capturing images that tell a story of music and the artists who create it. It's still amazing to me to be a part of this family who has persevered for 3 generations to create and preserve images that become part of other families' histories. I'm hoping that my sons may want to continue the story.